Welcome to GDX.me. So all those graphics, any type of cool art that you guys seen have been coming from this man right here. And a little small introduction, Collin, if you don't mind, can you give us some insight of where you're from, where you're at, where you're heading? Just a little resume check, just to give listeners and viewers out there an introduction to you if they haven't heard you on our podcast already.
Well, yeah, I'll do a really quick recap. I mean, I was in the game industry since 2000, and Visual Concepts, which is now owned by 2K Marin, was my first studio in the Bay Area. Ever since then, I always knew that I wanted to kind of create my own comic book or do my own thing at some point, own my own property, get to do my own art direction, my own characters, everything. So I feel that after 18 years in the game industry, I've decided to kind of take a break and work on a graphic novel, which we'll definitely, hopefully, talk about a little bit more later. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what else I need to add in there. I mean, I did work on BioShock 2 with you. And after that, I then worked on the Skylanders franchise for like 5 years. So that was kind of a big thing. And that was sort of where I ended it. And I decided to take a break and move up to Bend, Oregon. No longer worry about commutes, whatnot, raise our new daughter that we just had 2 years ago. So that's been a big life change.
Yeah, man. Congratulations, man.
But yeah, is there anything else I should maybe add in there? I'm not quite sure.
Well, this is actually a nice little tidbit for longtime listeners and people who have been at least following along our own story here. It'd be kind of nice to talk about, because 2K was my first official job in the industry, and I think you came on like maybe a couple months after I did, or 5 months after I did, but it was like a project that was, I wouldn't say complete chaos, but we definitely needed like some order, and you came in to kind of lead our modeling team there to help out with that. So have you, to kind of give some insight on how that worked, I guess, what was your impression going to the project like that? Not to expand it too much, but kind of give like a little story there, because I feel like when I first met you too, it was an eye opener, because the modeling team was still pretty junior level outside of you coming on, and you kind of clean house.
It was also very small for a AAA studio. I was kind of shocked. We had 5 people. But yeah, for me, it was definitely an interesting learning experience, because at that point, when I was put in that kind of lead role, I was just a yes man. I was so happy to, be given that opportunity. Per usual, I thought the people around me were also, put through a rigorous interviewing process, or because of their skills, they were where they were. But yeah, it was definitely a tough road. Man, I mean, I feel like, I think we had the modeling team happy after a little bit with, our camaraderie of, walks and, actually chatting a lot, doing lunches a lot together, everything, and just being a really capable team. But unfortunately, the rest wasn't around us to back us up at that point, So that made life really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it was my first experience of the political game that I was not at all aware at all. Because when you came on, you had at least 7 years of experience before 2K, or 8 years?
Yeah. I think at that point I had 10 years, but I wasn't really ever involved in politics. I was like most people, where I was like, okay, I get paid to do this job. And it wasn't until I got the more creative roles or titles that I realized, like, you need people around you that believe in creativity, and are willing to let you guys kind of run with it. But yeah, I don't want to get too much into that because I think it'll turn into a big trash talking session. But I feel like at that point, I was just too young and I didn't know to push back. I mean, that was my one thing, is when we were being given insane deadlines and constantly being retold or told to redo entire levels that took months to make just because of someone's one random opinion in a meeting. It's like you learn as a lead or manager that you need to push back. And if nothing happens from that, then you're pretty much screwed. To put it lightly, So you either got to get the money or hope there's something better on the horizon.
And I don't want to go too deep into it because it's a deep hole. I just want to paint a picture of where we were, at least the last time I worked with you at a physical location, and kind of like grazing past a few more like games that you put out to where you are right now. So at some point, right, which is the focal point of this talk or this conversation, is that you decided to hit a pause button. And it sounds very casual when I say it, but like it's heart-wrenching because I myself gone through this little mental shift where just to kind of give you a little insight, and then I'll definitely throw it back to you, where I had to just rethink what I'm used to, like a comfortable salary. I put in my 2 weeks, and then I get 2 weeks out of a paycheck out of it, and somewhat reliable until get laid off or whatever. At least a faux pas version of reliability, but there's some comfort into that. But at some point, like every developer wishes, what you've done is like being able to, I want to focus on other things. I have enough comfortable income where I can do this and just make the move over to Oregon. Can you kind of talk about that pivotal moment where you were kind of stockpiling your cash, making the decision, should I, shouldn't I? Like, can you kind of walk us through that moment where to finally, when you decided to go with it, like what was going through your mind?
Well, once again, I don't want to sound like I'm doing another bitch session, but I think it reminded me once again of 2K where I was at, or at least the team I was with, not 2K. I mean, we all know that teams change every couple of years. People come, go, teams get laid off. But I was at another studio where it was just kind of the same thing. It was, or not same thing, but, we had an art director who didn't care to be there and work on games. We as an environment concept artist, 3D modeler, builder, world creator, I was never invited to the game design meetings to even talk about the composition or what the theme of the levels would be. So, you know what I mean? After a while, you realize that you're back in that same pattern of just, hey, get a paycheck. Don't worry about making the best level, the best product, the best, because it's just not going to happen. You can push, you can reach out for help. You can ask leads, hey, I've been doing all this work. I created the last 2 levels that were used at our, toy conventions or E3, and you still get no respect. So I think for me at one point, it just came down to that, no respect. And of course, the typical commute in the Bay, you know how it is. It's just crazy rent, everything. So you got to live further and further away from your studios. And I just needed a break to do my own thing. I mean, I've always wanted to do my own comic. And if that means I can also own my own property and characters and just something that I can put on my portfolio that shows, hey, I'm capable of creating, art directing, concepting. I mean, I have my color palettes. I mean, I'll probably show some pages later, but, I got a very interesting color palette going with some of my stuff. So, but that was kind of my final move right there. Was I just knew the next couple of years were going to be hell, and our studio was either going to go down or we were going to get nothing but, typical trademark work again instead of fun, creative work. And sure enough, that has happened. So I'm kind of glad I left, made the move. it's given me a lot of time to also hang with my kid. But yeah, we'll talk about that also later, because when we talk about my daily schedule, it's definitely not a 9 to 5, 5 days a week. It's all over the place right now. So,
I mean, aside from location, because ever since I known you, you've been in the Bay Area for a long time. You're not originally from there, but you spent a good amount of your career in the Bay Area, all the way since Sega, right? All the way to the point where you left to Oregon. So how was that? What was the attraction there? Like, why Oregon of all places?
Well, that's not really a game related like incident or anything. That was just my wife and I were just trying to figure out where we wanted to move. And I didn't really like any area around the Bay. Didn't want to move to Tahoe because that's not really a city, a town, anything. And Northern California is a little too many small towns, nothing really there. So we found Bend, Oregon, and gosh, it's this beautiful, mountain ski town with a river that runs through it. We have lots of beer, fests that go on and breweries in town. And I mean, it just seems like a nice, more smaller town that I kind of need right now. I was definitely sick of the traffic, the commute in the Bay Area. And it's just, I wish I had a better answer to why we picked this town, but
Yeah. So I'm going to run through a lot of your artwork while we do this interview. But so last time we talked, you were going into your hobby, your profession. But you actually are one of the few developers that I know that have able to kind of balance two different skill set within the game industry. You're a 3D artist as well as an excellent 2D artist that you've kept up over the years. I remember at least at 2K, you were in the parking lot kind of inking your pages during lunch breaks and stuff, just to kind of, just a mental shift in your workflow. Now, how did you get into this business? Because that other side of like enjoying how to do things, like kind of restarting that network too, is like a whole different skill to kind of keep up to make sure that is something viable for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, keep in mind, when I got into the game industry, I was a little shocked because I figured most artists knew how to draw a little bit because, growing up, I didn't have a computer, Photoshop, anything. It was all comic books. I love certain cartoons. So you want to draw, get creative. And it was definitely, I think, when I finally got into the game industry, after all the interviewing and, we got to look at your portfolio, this and that, I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, it seems like only 10, 20% of artists actually know how to draw. And 3D is just kind of a secondary, creative tool. But I've always preferred drawing because it keeps me, I think, creative. It's anytime I do a level or have to come up with something new, especially at Skylanders, which I loved, I could really draw upon my color palettes and my just fun saturated colors, my creativity of all my days back in the day with playing with Legos and, rebuilding constantly new stuff. But so yeah, to me though, also drawing comic books is a little more or less stressful. I mean, we all know in the 3D world, it just changes so much. Technology is so crazy at times. People just assume, give the art team a month and they'll be up and rolling from, this new interior software to, another software we just bought, like Unreal or something, which is, great programs, but it always takes time to learn, to be efficient. And with my art, I feel like I can definitely just sit back and I don't want to say basic skills because it does take a lot of, compositing and all sorts of, random skills. Yeah, we'll say, but it's a lot less tech intensive than the game industry. So right now it's nice taking a little break from the tech part. I'm sure anytime I have to go back, I mean, we all know it just takes a few months or a little bit of time to just pick up what that team is actually using. And then luckily I have my well of creativity to draw from, thanks to my drawing and everything and my constant coloring. And whereas I feel other artists, they might just, know how to use a 3D program and look at an image and copy it. But I do also love the fact that I will have more on my resume. Like I said, I have video games now. I have, thanks to you and a few other people, I have some, apparel like shirts and stuff I've done logos for. I got to do a beer logo for Bear Roots Brewing Company down there in, what is it? Irvine? No. La Vista, California. I think it's down near San Diego. Mm-hmm. And I got to do Feast of Flesh. What is it? Feast of Flesh, the new Wendy's D&D game. I got to do some top-down maps, thanks to my buddy Alex Lopez, who I also worked with at 2K Visual Concepts in the early 2000s. And now I'm going to have, 8 issues with another comic printed by Antarctic Press. So it's kind of a nice repertoire, my portfolio, resume, whatever. And it feels good. So I'm hoping that in the future, this will, allow me to one day, if I ever go back to maybe a big city or a job or something, and I look better as a potential for an art director, creative director, something, rather than just in the seat artist. So
I don't think enough. I don't think enough credit is due right there. I mean, like, we can always tell a great 2D artist through 3D, at least I've noticed, right? How you can kind of bring over all those lessons in composition and color theory back into the 3D art, and it just elevates the art form itself within a game environment. You're talking about taking that step away, man, from the industry to kind of better your skill, because I think me and you can both relate being in a game development cycle where it's 3 to 5 years or something. We're kind of stuck. Yes, there are some creative flexibility there, but you're still working within a box. Most likely you're repeating the same techniques over and over to kind of get the asset out or level out or whatever. There's very little time to really explore and experiment. Most of that is done, I think you can agree, at the beginning of a game cycle, but during it, which is the big chunk of it, 75 to 80% of the game is more about just repeating, rinse, and just putting it out there just to get things going. So I would say most developers don't have that fast growth that we all would like to dedicate time to. And I think you and I, just being in those circles now in a smaller development team, that independent developers or smaller developers, or at least shorter dev cycles, have tremendous growth and versatility and is able to just do pretty much a little bit of everything. And when they bring it back into a big studio, they are like light years above other developers who are kind of used to this this cog like machine, right? So I don't know if you're there yet, and you kind of talk about a little bit how you kind of tampered with different projects, like taking a break from Hazel and working on that D&D game for your friend. How was that transition? Did you find yourself going back into that? It's like, man, resuming back to this workflow, I feel like, I mean, you're getting used to it again, but also you probably feel pretty good too, pretty strong, right?
Well, yeah, that was another one where I'm sure every artist can relate to, is even when, they contacted me, they love my work, after my buddy showed them my portfolio, but they were still, of course, like, okay, but can you do top-down maps, Because, if you draw characters, 3D, whatever, everybody wants to see what they're going to probably get from you already on your website. So I did have to do a little test, which they did like, but yeah, it was definitely a tough transition because I mean, I knew I could do it, but the timeline was very, very short. So I didn't get to be very creative with it. It was pretty much, here's a street, here's a house, here's your layout. Whereas if I had more time, I would have loved to have gone in there and definitely, added more of like a pond with some, treasure chest around it or whatever, more broken wood, just more decorative, scene work. So, I mean, it came down to like 2 days for one map and all in Photoshop top down. But it was awesome, like I said, because now I'm going to get a big booklet with, my work in it. Hopefully people are playing it. My buddy Alex did an amazing job on the, characters. So it looks like people definitely know it's a quality, product at least. But, yeah, it was tough because I did some major late nights. That's, I pretty much have to watch my kid most of the day. I mean, we do have a babysitter from time to time, but I use my nights to really get my art done. And when the D&D came, that's when I was literally staying up till like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. And then I would sleep to 9 or 10 the next day. And, my kid would come back from the babysitter. So, yeah, it's definitely been a crazy lifestyle right now. I mean, even with this comic that you see, Hazel right here, I'll talk about this flip book in a moment. But, yeah, it's just pretty much I live my nights doing all this. I mean, I try to sleep as much in the day and then from 8 to 9 at night to hopefully 2 a.m. in the morning, I try to pump this comic book out. So when this is finally over at the end of the year, which I'm hoping early January, end of December, I can finally go back to playing a few video games, which I haven't done in a long time, and go to bed at early, regular hours and focus more on hanging out with our kid and my wife, of course. But yeah, so that was definitely a wrench because once I was done also with the D&D, switching back into Hazel took me a few days. I mean, you had to get back in the zone of penciling again and drawing. I mean, like I've always said, it's definitely scary seeing a blank sheet of paper and having to, put quality work on it. So that's all I have for that.
Well, I kind of want to ask you more about this because you took on a couple challenges or new challenges all at once, right? You have a newborn. She's about 2 years old now, but you kind of started this kind of new path in Oregon. It sounded like you kind of settled in Oregon and then had that baby right after the house because it happened pretty within the year, right? If I remember it correctly, like pretty fast.
Yes, it wasn't planned, but it was obviously, it worked out perfectly. So, we moved. My wife works from home, thankfully, right now. I, took time off, which I think I mentioned on my last podcast. I got to finally learn how to do home improvement, which is cool. So did tile work, built fence, redid my back deck, paint, all sorts of stuff. So it was kind of also a multi-growing experience. Anything art related, I am definitely still doing, just in trying out different tools, mediums. And right now it's going to be my graphic novel, and video games in 3D will always be there, I assume, because I think it's pretty easy to jump back in and pick it back up.
Well, kind of to talk more about your schedules and how you balance that, you spend a good amount of your life, right? Pretty much used to doing, aside from your wife, or not doing your wife, but I'm saying aside from spending time with your wife or spending time with family, right? You kind of had time to yourself to kind of focus on your craft. So how was that, man, when now you have a newborn and other responsibilities that take a lot of your time, and you're kind of talking about now you're kind of like a night owl to make sure that you put in the amount of dedication. Do you feel like, although, yes, you have a lot more responsibilities, how do you keep yourself competitive, let's say to a Collin Fogel that isn't married or has a kid? Like, how do you still build up your skills and do everything that you want to do, but without the time that you used to have? And I think this is a problem that most artists, as they age, encounter a lot. And I kind of want to hear your thoughts about that, man.
Oh, yeah, I don't really know what to say on that. I mean, I do know that, because I don't know. I mean, maybe if you're single and you don't have what I have, you might procrastinate a little more, or maybe you won't. Right. It comes down to the drive, I guess. So, I mean, I still definitely need to procrastinate, take a little time to myself. But yeah, it feels like definitely certain times, especially when the kid's not here, it's like, okay, I have to make do with my limited time and just push forward. But originally it was a lot easier. And now that I'm, at the point of no return where I do have a publisher, they do have set dates for me, it does feel real. I am now having to, just step up and use a lot of my nighttime, every free time, and just hope for the finish. I mean, it would be nice if I could work on a project that doesn't take over a year. Video games takes a few years. This comic has taken me a year and a half. But if I did have a full week off, 8-hour day, I'm sure it would have been done a lot quicker. So I don't really know how to say how I keep the edge over someone else, though, that might have all that free time. I mean,
well, let me kind of paint an example, right? Like in a work studio or any type of settings that you're around other colleagues and stuff, it's easy to kind of look over your shoulder as like, well, I kind of started when he started, therefore we should kind of end up at the same. So you're constantly kind of being friendly competition with your colleague too. And that kind of helps, some kind of improvement. But like now that we're discovering, and you've been doing this longer than I have, just working in your office alone, aside from maybe like browsing ArtStation or something like that, there is that lack of, it's not motivation, but there is that freedom and comfort where it's like, hey, it's up to me if I want to finish this or not. But you don't have that nagging feeling that your buddy is like kind of one-upping you every time or every deadline or every stand-up. You know what I mean? I don't know if you ever thought about that or it affects you in any way.
It never has. I've never been one of those people, I think. It's always just been do the best that I can, and I feel like that's always worked out. But I wonder if it's just because my style from my comic book background has allowed me to kind of feel like any game I work on or anything I work on, I can kind of adjust my style to fit that, I guess. But I don't know. I think to me, it's just, it comes down to drive and passion. I mean, it's like I'm sure you've talked about this many times. Like you can have a studio full of 100 people and you find out later on that maybe 4 of those people are attempting to work on their own video games outside of work. Everybody else just goes home, plays video games or does whatever. So it definitely does come down to the individual with that drive and passion. And like I said, I right now have a drive and passion to hopefully own something that can, a product that can make me money or someone want to make a toy off of, or a video game or a movie or something. So if the paycheck, though, it keeps you happy and you're okay with, your apartment and your crazy commute, even though you've been in the industry for 10, 15 years, that's great. But I feel like this is maybe another option to get me what I want or where I need to go. So.
Well, that's the big question. Do you have at least a set idea of what you want to do in 5-10 years? I mean, you're discovering like this new industry, which is the comic industry, which I want to talk a bit about your first major deal that you're working on right now, but also that's like a different trajectory, right? Within games, we kind of like, you made it through lead, you made it as senior lead, you know, maybe come back as creative director, sure, but that's a different path from where you are right now in a different industry. Like what is you want to like a Marvel movie, mate? Or what?
Well, actually, yeah, let me go back really quick too. You know, I feel like some people, you know, they get things handed to them, like not everybody. So I don't want to make this a blanket statement. Please forgive me. But, you know, I have kind of worked with, you know, an art director that can't draw, we'll say. And so you and I both know no matter how hard we work, we'll probably never get that because we need connections or need to know the, you know, executive producer or whatever. But I've noticed that there's a lot of comic book artists that get way more credibility and, you know, they're now getting scooped up by game companies to be their art director and whatnot and this and that. So I'm also hoping that aside from creating my own product, you know, comic book, everything, it also just gets me exposure to people like that who might be like, oh man, we love this guy's style. He's obviously creative. He can probably do medieval, futuristic, whatever. He has his own book published. He's got a name out there. Let's bring him on as our creative director, you know, or something. So I'm hoping kind of this opens avenues in all fields, but I do hope obviously that I get more of an opening to the comic book industry, because I would love to do a lot more conventions, meet a lot more pros. You know, I've just always had a lot of idols that I've never been able to meet. I mean, good luck going to a Comic-Con and actually talking to any of these people and seeing how they do it, you know, what they do on their, you know, what their daily schedule's like. Just watching them sketch or how they actually draw, you know, certain things, compose. So, yeah. And then from there, of course, yeah, just hoping it snowballs. I mean, I think like everybody, I hope to God one day at E3 or something, or even at a Comic-Con, I mean, I see someone dressed as Hazel walking around. You know, I'd love to see a cosplayer. Or if I ever get money, I might try to commission that if this comic book actually picks up. But yeah, so it's all about drive, passion.
Yeah. Well, do you mind kind of giving me like in the audience out there, kind of like a peek of where the comic industry is right now? Because when you talk about Comic-Con too, it's kind of been like dominated by Hollywood, right? Being with their press conferences and stuff. Is it more like people trying to get a movie deal now or a show deal? Is that the end game for a lot of comic artists?
You know, I'm really not sure what everybody is out there, believe it or not. I mean, I am like I said, I don't even play video games anymore the last 2 years because I'm just spending all my free time trying to draw if I can. But let's see here.
Well, how did this comic deal come about? Like, was it through networking, like you mentioned before? Like, because it seems like it's a tough industry to get into.
Yeah, it's definitely really tough. I mean, I think what gave me my biggest boost was when I first sent out my first pitch like a year ago, and I heard back from Dark Horse within a week. And that kind of gave me my boost, like, okay, yes, I think I have the quality work to make it. So this is the right avenue. You know, I mean, it is a lot of time, and you always sit there and second guess yourself. You're always like, oh my God, is all this time and effort worth it? And then in a year, nobody wants to publish it. And then I'm screwed doing it myself. I don't have the time, money to do all this. So I definitely needed to find a publisher. And unfortunately with Dark Horse, they just stopped. I mean, they wanted, you know, work done with my script and story. And anyway, long story short, I am now luckily with Antarctic Press down in Texas. And yeah, it just feels good knowing that something's going to get out there to the public. You know, I mean, I'm not a promoter really. I can't really go to Comic Cons. I mean, they're definitely, like you said, being taken over by a lot of Hollywood movie stuff and actors and cosplayers and whatnot. But I'm still, just. Oof. So I don't really have a pulse on the comic industry quite yet. I'm hoping once this book comes out, I'll get more of a better idea of, how it's going, where I stand. The end goal is to definitely make money back. So if a studio does wind up buying it, that's probably the best way if it doesn't sell as well, in comic book form. But I do see it as a gorgeous video game or movie, that's for sure, one day. So we shall see.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about Hazel. It's about to see its first print, right? You were talking about it to me on a personal level, but do you mind kind of sharing that piece of news as well?
Yes. So originally it was going to be a 3-issue miniseries, and luckily the editors down at Anarch Press, they have another very gorgeous, great comic book called Interstellar Dust, which is by C.J. Hudson and Ben Flores. And it's more of a space comic book. Mine's more of a futuristic. Mine's definitely New York in the future. I wanted to do more of a special agent team that has to go, into the sewers, the depths. So that's why they have these sort of gas, helmets that they can wear underwater and gas, whatever, poisonous locations. But, and I mean, it does have a little bit of that Japanese anime theme. So if you notice the bathing suit with a little bit of skin showing, I originally wanted more, but got to keep it a little, realistic, I guess. But so anyway, in February is when it should be published in this, double feature called Offworld, even though my comic's called Hazel and theirs is called Interstellar Dust. They're going to do a flip book. That way my 3 issues won't be 3 issues. They'll be in 6 issues now. And then hopefully if it does well, I'll get a director's cut 3-issue print afterward. And if it does well, I'm hoping I can find someone to actually do the combined graphic novel set, because I think most people also like buying that, where it's just in one book. But so that's how that's gone so far. I mean, it's definitely, God, just the unknown of knowing if anybody would publish it was the scariest part, like I said, because I do feel it's quality work. It's just... you got to hope, they get so many pitches and you got to hope you're the one that they want to publish. So that definitely feels good.
So I'm also definitely interested in how, as you are kind of building this up and getting a lot of traction with your new career, which is, I think a lot of people, when they hear about this, it's scary as fuck, because you're basically starting a new industry and starting new connections, and there might be some overlap. Thankfully, we are all geeks, that there are some connections out there to kind of help you, kind of boost you through things. But kind of taking that pause button, I'm sure like we talk often enough, and I'm sure you talk to other friends that are still in the industry. Being able to step away from it for the last 2 years, correct? What?
3.
Yeah. What kind of conversations?
It's been 3 now.
Is it 3 years?
It's been 3 now, but or maybe 2.5. But I think what's kept me relevant is that I keep working on art and I keep posting it, because I am working on Hazel. I do feel that my art is improving every month that I work on it. So I feel like that leaves the gates open. I have a lot of ex-coworkers that do contact me and offer me not free jobs, but offer me contract work or whatnot. And they see that I'm still, staying relevant and still working. I haven't just fallen off and all my skills are going to waste and whatnot. I'm still very well driven and still attempting, or at least this will be like my one shot probably for a while at doing like my own dream. I would love to do probably a video game as well, but I just feel like that would just require me to have more people and a lot more time to do, which I just can't. So right now the comic book seems more feasible. But yeah, don't get me wrong. Oh man, every time I do see some video games, I just want to jump back in and do some very, fun creative work, because I feel like it's kind of lacking out there right now. A lot of it's more that realistic and indie games where the cool styles are actually coming from. So,
well, I kind of want to ask you about how, aside from kind of taking a step back, but and still keeping in contact with all your friends that value your skill set, that it's something that I don't feel a lot of game developers talk about when they kind of take their foot off the pedal, when it comes to just one-upping themselves with the next big game, right? I think that's like a death cycle that can happen. But I want you to kind of explain how the other aspects of your life being better, like the ability to kind of watch your daughter grow. I mean, the simple things like that, I feel like I didn't really think about. I mean, I've been only at this for like 5-6 months, way shorter than you have, but it was something that I dreamt about, but not really fully appreciated as soon as I started to work from home and focus on my own thing, where I was like, holy crap, like all this stuff I was missing out and would have kept on missing out. And just appreciating life itself, where game dev is very demanding of your time in the office, as we all know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe I've been a little spoiled, so I haven't really thought about too much about what I'm missing nowadays. Because I did, I did enjoy going to work. Every company I had, I always had a group of buddies, or I'm the type where every hour or so I had to get up and just go say hi or see, what people were working on and whatnot. So I did enjoy kind of that aspect, the camaraderie, the chatting with other creative people. Right now, I'm definitely more in my own element, just, in a beautiful area with my family. But yeah, I guess the whole 9 to 5, Monday through Friday aspect, the commute, working with people that don't really have a vision at all and whatnot, all that stress and everything is just kind of out of the way. Everything relies on me, so I'm definitely a lot more pickier and still a little hard on myself, when I'm drawing and whatnot. I hope every page looks like gold, even though it's not. So I got to push on through. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it is a trip. I mean, it is awesome being able to have this time to, hang out with my kid. That's true. I mean, most people I've met, they're like, you're lucky. I guess they don't really see a dad walking their kid around in the daytime that often, so. But yeah, I mean, life is still limited. I mean, it's still like work, I guess, because I do have my comic, but maybe when this is over, it'll definitely feel like I've escaped again for a little bit.
It is something that I picked up on, where the day kind of just slips past much faster than I realized, because I think with the 9 to 5 job, I was kind of counting the seconds where it felt a little longer. But at the instant when I shifted to working for myself, I was like, oh my God, it's already 5 p.m. I didn't get through half the things I wanted to do. Like, did you find yourself in those situations? Like the day just completely just escaped.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that time has been flying by. That's for sure. But yeah, it's also because I'm hoping I make more progress on my book. So I think that right now has me in a mental lock where, I mean, this has been a 1.5-year project. So I wish I could feel more freer, like I said, but it still is. I mean, I'm not right now thinking about vacations, taking days off, really going for, even trips around Bend. It's pretty much, unfortunately, every free minute I'm like, ooh, okay, I got to jump back on page 11, 12, 13, and then I have to color them. So, When I initially moved up here, though, it did feel very, oh my gosh, I can't explain the feeling in my body, mental, everything. It was just such a, God, relief, amazing. Just, yes, I'm starting a new turn in my life. You know, I'm moving to a more beautiful location. You know, everybody says the Bay Area is nice because all these, you know, people, you know, probably are nicer, but when you hit the highway and you start driving, you realize that's not true. You know? So yeah, everybody's out for themselves. So, but yeah, it's been a nice slowdown, very relaxing. I mean, I enjoy still doing a lot of fun yard work too and whatnot to break up my time when I hang with my kids. So that's, yeah, getting more fresh air and whatnot. Both of our grandparents actually just moved up, so that's amazing. I haven't lived near my parents in like 20 years now, so this is going to be a definite another turn in the chapter. So it's nice having them here.
Yeah, man. Like talk about that, because that's something I didn't really. I think everybody kind of thinks about and appreciate it in some way. It'd be nice to have family, but until you have your little clan of your own with a kid and a wife, where you start to be like, hey, man, I can't get enough of hanging out with my family or close friends. How was that like conversation come about? Because your parents and your wife's parents aren't originally from Oregon. They just decided that was a time shift that allowed, you know, to spend more time with their grandchildren.
Well, yeah, my parents are from, you know, Tucson. That's where I lived for, God, like 6-7 years before I went to, you know, Phoenix for college and then to the Bay Area. But yeah, I've always, whenever I've gone back to visit, I've always been like, oh my God, this is so awesome, hanging out, doing little walks with my family. You know, they obviously have usually a dog or something, and we still don't have one. But yeah, just seeing my sisters too, the kids, everything. And it just sucks when you work in a game industry or at a studio where you're given just certain dates. I mean, you know how it is. They're like, no, we're in crunch mode, so you can't go anywhere for 6 months. And then that crunch turns to 9 months to a year and a half. And you're just given a few days to maybe fly back to see your family. And then you realize that certain people at your company, leads or producers, they don't care to travel or go anywhere. So they expect everybody to be at the studio, you know, all year round. So I guess, I mean, also leaving gave me time to just think about that and spend some time more with family. And now that they're coming up here, that's going to be even better. You know, I'm hoping my sisters and whatnot maybe follow suit in time, but I'd imagine it's better than living in Phoenix. No.
It probably helps that you're really selling them on it. I'm sure because of all the visits, it was
they've been up
very
here,
convincing.
I think like most people, when they come up here, they're like, oh my gosh, what a cute town. You know, it's almost, I don't know whether to call it a city or town, but it does have that nice small city or town vibe. We get all 4 seasons up here. You know, I mean, I know I enjoyed the sundown in Cali, but I also enjoyed seeing some rain and some snow every so often and some color in the sunsets, you know. But so what you're looking at right here on the screen too is just one of my first 2-page spreads just showing the team. Originally it was just going to be Hazel. I wanted to feel more like a Batman style comic where she does solo missions and, you know, we have unique villains and whatnot. And my writer, MLS Weech, or Matthew Leistokow, one of my old buddies, he decided to, you know, create a team. That way we can have some character development with Hazel. So that's how we got Swan, Jinx, and Chloe in here. And I mean, there's another growing lesson for me is I used to just draw like one character. Now I have to draw multiple characters in panels and everything. And that just, another learning experience, another skill I had to develop, you know, get that composition, everything.
So as a creative person that is especially starting, because I relate comic artists as a lot like a writer, right? You're sitting there at your desk, you're kind of creating this whole world in your own head and putting down on paper, which requires a lot of inspiration, a lot of experiences to be able to tell a good story. Hazel is something that you've had in your mind for a long time. What has been the main inspiration from this? You were talking about a little bit influence from Batman and other comics that you love, but this is a story that I for as long as I've known you, have been trying to tell and kind of put on paper. Where did it come from?
Well, originally I did more of a kid fantasy, or what is it, a medieval children's style book. It was called Dark Holidays. And that was, I did get an offer from Ape Entertainment back in the day. I don't know if they're still around. I mean, now I'm wishing I had them publish it, but back in the day, I was like, no, this is, too little money for all my time I've been spending on it. But after pitching that around, it just seemed like nobody was into, medieval fantasy, even though I know people love that. So I'm just assuming the editors at, these comic companies were like, no. So I switched to a more futuristic, I don't want to say typical comic, but I was like, all right, I'll do, modern or futuristic version of a comic story. And God, it definitely took a while to evolve, because originally Hazel was a guy. I felt way more comfortable drawing, men's proportions out of whack. And I feel like with women, I still don't have it nailed down. I mean, every body type is different, every thigh, hip, stomach area, just God, the shortness and length of a body is just also different. And for women, it's a lot harder to make it look nicer. You know what I mean? I don't know if I want to say sexier or just, aesthetically pleasing, but with men, you can exaggerate. So anyway, that was a big transition. I did have one of my original writers that contracted me back in the day, James Naness, that just suggested like, oh, maybe you should try a female. So I wound up changing her to a female, and the costume obviously looked god awful for a while. I mean, I went through so many changes. I initially tried inking it, and in the end, I realized just penciling and then coloring was going to be the best, quickest way to go. But one thing I do want to show at one point is just kind of my roughs, just to show people like how crappy, I don't know if you can see, like my roughs are for my pages. And then once it goes from like that, that's when I eventually turn it, to an actual comic page where looks very well done and colored, but, just so everybody knows, the initial state is usually just really, really rough and loose, just to give me an idea. This usually works good, but sometimes I do have to spend more time going back to these because, as we all know, pre-production is key. Which drove me wild about the game industry, is pre-production in the game industry seems to be the, hey, let's, goof off and do whatever the hell we want, and we'll figure it out during the actual, process. But it's great to figure it out all before you actually begin that journey and try to concept out as much as you can, because it makes you want to redo less work later.
And I think that's something that a concept artist understands a lot better than other discipline, because a writer or a concept artist, I keep always relating these two disciplines as being very similar, because you kind of have to think of a world way before anybody else does, that has the full details and explanation and branches all explained before anybody comes on board. And I think a lot of other disciplines kind of take that for granted, where when they kind of jump on, they just figure as they go, which unless go ahead.
Sorry, let me just jump in really fast. Unless you have, like we talked about, maybe like an art director or art lead that will allow you to actually use some of your skills and your creative abilities. Because I mean, I'm just saying that based on my past experiences where they're like, nope, we're going to get you a concept. And so that's where it's like, okay, I wish you guys would have spent time early on figuring this out instead of having no respect or trust in your art team to maybe come up with something cool, you know? So sorry, I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah. I mean, the pipeline gets kind of clogged up. I think this is where the frustration comes in.
Yeah.
It's not normal for games to take 5 years plus. I think if everything was executed correctly, it usually takes 2 to 3 years. I keep using this example in recent memory, Death Stranding. I don't know if you kept up with that game. It's the Hideo Kojima game. I know you're not quite a fan, but it's his new game. It's the guy behind Metal Gear. Hopefully I'm not telling you. Yeah, right. So Metal Gear is my favorite trilogy, but basically his last game that's about to be released is something I keep referencing to because it's a game that took 3 years from concept to production, and that is just unheard of in nowadays times with AAA development. From the time he announced it, it was still in like concept stage, and it only took him 3 years of pure execution.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't had my subscription to Game Informer in a while, and like I said, my head's just been in a hole, like working on this comic, so I have not been following the game industry and whatnot.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. I mean, that also kind of reminds me of another issue. I'll just bring this up really fast. Is I know that when people look for concept artists nowadays, they're like, oh, you have to draw realistically. You know, I want the light. I want the highlights. I want it to look like I'm looking at a photo almost. And I love that artist, which nobody really seems to bring up, is he has a very loose, sketchy style, comic book style, but, you know, it's very stylized, looks fantastic. And they were able to go, okay, we can easily take this cool comic sketch and we'll give it to a 3D modeler that'll, you know, make it look realistic in our video game. And so I kind of get annoyed sometimes when I come across studios where they're like, no, we're looking for, you know, concept, but you have to know how to draw realistic or something. We're not looking for the creativity for what you're bringing. You just have to have that skill of copying a photo almost or something. So kudos to him for still, you know, being in charge and trying. I'm sure he's got the right people around him if he did it in 3 years. Yeah. Check that out.
Well, a lot of it is that team in particular worked together for many years, and so when they formed the new studio, he brought a lot of his senior guys and who were ready to kind of hit the ground running, which is the essential part to any game development team, where you kind of know how everyone works and just need that high fidelity visual idea to execute. So
the trust. Oof.
But now that you're like mostly solo, man, like how do you miss clonking heads with other people like such as myself? I mean, how was that process for you?
Well, no, that's a great point. I mean, I'm one of those where if, you know, like when we worked on XCOM, I thought that was hilarious when the Australian team, you know, they seemed to come up with all the cool, fun, creative stuff. Like they had the bus. Remember when we had the alien goo that would take over items and maybe, you know, start to move? Mm-hmm. I remember one day they messed around and they made a school bus that had, you know, tentacles at the bottom and was riding around. And it was just funny that everybody thought that was the coolest thing. And then our leads and people were just like, oh yeah, that's dumb. Get that out of here, whatever. So it's kind of interesting. You know, I'm one of those where it's like, if I see something just cool and fun, you know, you probably want to put it in. Like, I don't understand how some people think or work. But so for me, that wasn't really a big issue, you know, working with other artists that have ideas or anything. It was only the people that would come with a really broad statement about something. And because of that, the entire fun, creative concept that was just, you know, caught up or even modeled is just thrown out the door. That's where I don't miss that. Mm-hmm. You know, if I can one day own a company and, you know, someone mentions, you know, hey, let's redo these 4 pages because, you know, I don't like this building or this location. That's where it's like, okay, I need to get you out of here, you know, or you're no longer allowed to these meetings if our time and effort and money is, you know, nothing to you, I guess. Or when it comes to statements like that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think is a growing pain. And I kind of want to remind anybody that's watching, feel free to ask questions. These are just my own curiosity. I'll be sure to kind of ask Collin through there too, through our Twitch chat or wherever you guys are watching. But feedback and critiques is something that is balanced that, I don't know. I think some artists and some developers have a handle on things. I myself I don't know. I feel like it comes with like, well, let me look at your resume first. All right, proceed with the feedback, which is tough because it doesn't always work like that. I mean, you kind of come into an environment with established leads or whatever, and so you kind of have to please and pick your battles a bit.
Well, I guess that's why I hate making these blanketed statements, because I know there's got to be studios out there that do it right. You know, they do have the right people. But God, you know, the ones that I worked at, or, you know, even with you, it never felt that way. It definitely, you know, felt like anybody, including, like I always joke, the janitor could walk in and say, oh, you know, this level looks a little weird. And they'd be like, you know, the producer would look at you and be like, all right, let's get that on the schedule, redo this level. You know, and it's like, man, can we talk about this?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I know there's got to be. I mean, when I look at games by, you know, like Vicarious Visions or whatever, or no, God, what's that studio out of North Carolina?
Which game?
Oh my God, I'm blanking.
It's not Epic, right? Insomniac.
Ratchet and Clank. Yeah, Insomniac. Like every game they put out, I'm always like, wow, they seem to just have it together. You know, from concept to finish. When I see their artwork, it's just. And, you know, who knows? They could have a lot of interior stuff. Maybe they have people that have to work over, you know, barriers to make it, you know, look that good. So you have the competent people working on it. But who knows? You know, it could just be that they have the right people. And, you know, you and I, unfortunately, had a fun mixed bag of. But, and it is sad because right now I do have one of my buddies working at a studio that has someone we worked with that's now a creative director. And it just boggles my mind. You know, it's one of those, this person can't even, you know, draw, doesn't have any vision, can't even get his vision across. But at the studio, you know, I hear that the producers and everybody's always like, oh, blah, blah, you're the man. And it's like, just because they have a name on their resume, you know.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that anyway, it's
true. It's true. It's there's a lot of factors that we don't control. And I think one of the reasons why we get burned out is because of that. Where you and myself included, many developers out there that are listening, I think at the base level are pretty straight shooters. It's like either it's good, it's good, or either it's bad, it's bad. Let's work together. But when it gets kind of messy is when you're climbing up the ladder. And this is something that, you know, I've stressed many times throughout the years that I've been podcasting and just sharing stories, where there's so many different factors that you're going to have to. Making the game is one aspect, but playing the game to make the game is a different layer that most people, I don't have any interest in. And at some point in my career, that was probably, I learned really quickly when we were working together. That was like a crash course about welcome to game development. But years after, it was like probably my 7-year mark. And I don't know if it was similar to you, where my 7-year mark, where I was like, there's a certain level of distance that I got to keep away to not affect my life, because, you know, I was bringing home the problems, you know, with my family and stuff. And it was really affecting my whole day.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a good point. Cause like now that I've left, it's allowed me to kind of calm down and mentally, separate myself from that. Cause I feel like, yeah, I was getting, no joke, a little bit of PTSD, whatever you want to call from it, where it's just like every day you're like, oh my God, I can't believe, I know that in a month, this person's going to have us redo this, and the next month, because that person just doesn't know what they're doing. And it eats away at you, because you have to spend time, your family is like, why aren't you coming home? And you're like, oh my, well, anyway. So I feel like now taking this break, it's given me time to realize like, hey, when I do go back to the game industry, if I do, and I'm a modeler or whatever, I'm not going to get so emotionally involved or try to worry about making, you know what I mean? Like the passion. It's like, unfortunately, now the passion's going to be cut in half. I'm going to become more of a worker. If I am with a team that I can tell is willing to use my extra, passion and skills, and I will use it, but otherwise I am not going to worry about, like you said, playing the game and just get my paycheck, work, do my job. And because I mean, when we worked at studios, there were people like that must have gone through what we went through, because they literally put their foot down and they were like, nope, even though we're in crunch, I am one of the 6 people out of 100 that's going home at 5 o'clock today, because I have a kid. Mm-hmm. And everybody else that doesn't have a kid, hey, you're screwed. Or even if you do, but you're, not going to push back with, the higher ups, and hey, you're pretty much screwed just working. But, yeah. So I feel like when I go back, I will be, like I said, a lot more at peace with just the situation and where I'm at. And hopefully, yeah, you will too, if that ever happens.